Welcome to the Proceedings Podcast. I'm Bill Hamblet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Friday, September 8th. It's hot as heck here in Annapolis and the D.C. area, but good to have you on board, everybody. We are very excited to have a new sponsor for the show this week, Textron Systems. Today's show is brought to you by Textron Systems Aerosonde Uncrewed Aircraft System, designed for expeditionary land and sea-based operations. Building on the system's 600,000 plus flight hours in the field, the hybrid quad variant offers vertical takeoff and landing capability and brings enhanced mission flexibility while maintaining a small footprint. Learn more at textronsystems.com. Okay, our guest today, joining us from Newport, Rhode Island, is Commander DeVere Crooks, U.S. Navy. He's the author of an article in the September issue of Proceedings, which is titled Management Makes Warfighting Possible. And if you have the print magazine, which hopefully got to your U.S. mailbox last week, the Training and Education issue, the article starts on pages 38 and 39. DeVere, great to have you on the show.
Hi, Bill. Thanks for having me.
All right. Before we get started on some questions, I just want to give our listeners some background on your background. You're a surface warfare officer. You had command as a commander of the USS Halsey, DDG 97, hit hard, hit fast, hit often, from 2019 to 2021. Then you went to Newport and you ran the prospective commanding officer course at Surface Warfare Officers School in Newport. And so every officer headed to command a surface warfare command, a surface Navy ship has to go through that school. And now you're a student at the Naval War College. And so I'll also point out that you're a member, not just a member, but the vice chair of the Naval Institute editorial board. So you're a big part of our team. How is it being a student again at NWC?
Well, I'm really enjoying it, but it's also my first time being a student in 16 years. So there's a certain curve involved in getting back into the groove and being able to read and digest fast enough and write on demand, on the rare occasion I have something useful to say in proceedings. But I'm really enjoying it. It is a real blessing to be able to do this again.
Cool. Yeah, I remember when I reported to NDU as a student at what used to be called the ICAF. Now it's the Eisenhower School. It was about 15 years ago. I had that same shock. Like, this is awesome, but oh my God, there's a lot to read here, and it's a different, it's just different from, our jobs when we're either at sea or on shore commands. Being a student is a different thing. And if you haven't done it for a while, it can be a bit of a shock to the system, a good one, but also a bit of a shock. So let's talk about the article a little bit. At the start, you mentioned a 2021 report that came out from Congress that critiqued the warfighting culture of the surface Navy. And you write that critiques such as this one ring somewhat hollow. Describe why.
Yeah, and I would emphasize initially the somewhat there. There was a lot in that report, and there's some other similar things. I mentioned that the series of interviews that an NPS student did, and then that was her thesis at NPS, and then she turned it into a SimSec article. There's some very valid things in both of those, and some things that I hardly agree with and would emphasize. What I'm specifically calling out in this article is the implication that there is somehow this family or I think it says dizzying array in the Senate report of administrative things that we're doing that we don't need to do that are getting in the way of warfighting. And that struck me in coming out of command. I thought about that a lot, and thought about what could I not be doing that I was doing in order to focus more on warfighting. And between that, thinking about that in my own experience, and then getting to spend a great 2 years facilitating the PCO course, as you mentioned, and talking to all the folks that have just, in most cases, coming right out of an XO tour, going right into command. I've really concluded that there isn't much that's extra, and the bulk of what we're dealing with on the management front is just a result of the complexity of the ships we built and the things we're asking them to be ready to do. So that was kind of the initial insight, one that causes me to take issue with at least that implication in those reports and similar critiques like that. And also, it's a little bit of a call to action to commanding officers that hey, there isn't some magical time coming when we're going to stop worrying about all these other things and just start being, blood and guts warfighters and nothing else. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I'll just foot stomp that a little bit, because around the table at the editorial board meetings for the past couple of years now, there have been a number of articles and article submissions, that have come to us that point to the same thing that you just mentioned. There's this idea, there's this sort of a mythology that if we could just focus on warfighting, you'd get rid of some of these administrative tasks. And so you've been a big part of those conversations, and I think perhaps some of that was maybe spurred your article or contributed to the impetus behind it too. But this has been an ongoing thing, and there's just not. It's not like there's hundreds of man hours or man days that you can just say, well, we're not going to do that. It's because it's not important. There aren't a whole lot of things that can be sort of trimmed from the to-do list, right? And so that's what your article gets to. You also mentioned this point, which I thought about quite a bit as I read this and reread it. You say modern warships are the most complex systems of systems of their size ever built, and those systems demand a lot of management. So discuss that a little bit and give a couple of examples from your time in command of Halsey.
Sure, and when I was CO of Halsey, I would proudly and maybe a little glibly go around and brag that Halsey, is an example of the most complex system of systems of its size. I would contend that a surface ship has more stuff in it than the space shuttle. I think that in some ways, and you certainly have to account for sensitivity of some things, but in some ways we're carrying more complexity than a nuclear submarine. Again, there's some things in the back end and other parts of the nuclear submarine that are very high consequence, so it's a little different. But it kind of hit me, and again, when I was in command, that there are just so many things. To give some examples, the basic frame of the hull is probably not much different than a ship, say maybe not quite as far back as a World War II warship, but at least a 70s or 80s, or even 60s era, warship. The whole mechanical and electrical basics are largely the same, although some of our newer ships are getting more complex in that respect, and there are some things are more complex. But on top of that, we have just piled in an amazing assortment of mission systems, and it is very impressive, and it's something I was very proud of. I asked my crew to be very proud of. That it's something that I don't think we, in the service community or any other community in the Navy that operates these kinds of things, really takes enough credit for. But I think you can safely say there is that a ship like Halsey or any other surface combatant is able to touch and act in every domain and pretty much every mission that the armed forces do. And it's hard to think of something that we can't at least tangentially support or be involved in. And there's not many things units that can say that. Just the command and control architectures that we can tap into, and all the networking systems and things that go with that. The array of combat systems we have. On a DDG, I'll stop saying mine because there's 70 of them. But on a DDG, you have your strike division and your ASW division have most of what amounts to a submarine combat system in them. Obviously, again, just real differences there, but just gives you a sense of the scope that we're also doing air defense. We're also doing surface-to-surface missions. We're all kinds of sort of you call lower end or missions other than war, SAR, visit board search and seizure, some missions of state kinds of things. So you're asking a lot of one system and building a lot of complexity in that one system. And then the crew that goes with it by nature is kind of a team of teams, sort of use a football analogy. You have this group of 350 people, each of whom has several different jobs that they're doing at different times and have to maintain readiness for and all that. So add that all together and it works out. There just isn't space in the schedule to do much else. I don't remember doing a lot that was not within a single degree or two of directly related to the mission. In fact, talking through this with some other folks, the only thing I've been able to come up with is the voting assistance officer. That function, maybe you can make a case, is not that directly tied. Obviously important for other reasons, but just about everything else we're doing, you can extrapolate very closely to the mission or one of the missions at hand.
Yeah, I think somebody mentioned to me the possibility of, the urinalysis program coordinator. Maybe that's something that you push ashore to a shore command rather than having it, on the ship. But there's not a lot of different things come to mind. They're like, oh, let's just not do this, right?
That's a great point. And there's certainly, and I sort of allude to this in the article, there are certainly discussions to be had about could some of these things be more efficient. Is it right to drop them on the echelon 5 command that an O5 ship is? There's a lot of discussion to be had about sharing of some of those burdens, and again, the efficiency and efficacy of some of those programs. But they're all there for a reason, and I think the pressure is such that we don't have time to do anything that's not there for a reason. Sort of self-reinforcing.
Yeah, and you didn't mention it, but I was also thinking while you were talking about the different missions, ballistic missile defense is yet another one. Space, at least sort of awareness of what's happening, in outer space. Cyber, IW, there's just the array of missions is much more complex than it was and broader than 30, 40 years ago when I was a JO. So yeah, all good.
And I'd say even in the little over 20 since I was a JO, I think it's gotten markedly and noticeably more complex. And again, not to be plaintive about it, something I'm very proud of. And I think our the folks that crew our ships and manage our ships and oversee our ships should be very, very proud of that.
Yeah, agreed. So you write, a warship commander must make sure his or her ship is both ready and lethal. And talk about the balancing act that entails.
Yeah, and this was again part of the kind of basic insight or basic realization I had, and a lot of this, I have to say, in general in this article, a lot of what I'm saying here are in some ways things that I wish I had done better in command. One of the neat things about standing in a classroom for 2 years talking to prospective COs. I mean, I spent more time talking about being a CO than I actually was a CO. So a lot of what's here is things that I realized sort of after the fact, and maybe I'm looking back and talking to myself in the past. There's two things here. One is, there is, as we said before, there is no bright shining line between you're going to stop the management and start the warfighting. And I think we've built ourselves sometimes into that expectation that when the proverbial balloon goes up, I'm just going to shift over and just worry about warfighting. Hey, all that maintenance is still going to need to be done. Those systems are still going to have the same problems. You're still going to have some of the same training concerns. Might be able to shed a few things. So some of it is just this message that, hey, this is here to stay. And so how can we day in and day out, thread the lethality into the routine aspects of management? And anybody who's served on a ship knows there are some very boring days. There's some really grinding routine involved. So a lot of what I tried to get at, and that I distilled from conversations with my students the last couple of years, is so what are some ways, given all that we can get in there and do these things? And there is something beyond just having all the readiness indicators green, all the systems working right, all the training accomplished, even all the training done well. There's something beyond that you need to go over the horizon and do the violent, unpredictable things that warfare is going to call for. So also this is about how can we do our best to weave that kind of stuff in, that sort of unquantifiable human factor. How can we build that in concert with all the less exciting day in and day out parts, or some which are pretty exciting, but all the other kind of ones and zeros that we're responsible for.
Yeah. So threaded throughout your article is this concept of a fundamental purpose. What is that in your words? And other people might say things along the line of keep the main thing, but the fundamental purpose, and how do you maintain that focus in the minds of your crew during times when they were, as you just pointed out, doing that everyday maintenance, the admin tasks, the peacetime sailing, the sometimes the really boring routine things. How do you keep that fundamental purpose in their minds, in their forethinking?
Yeah, and so I give some examples, I think, in the article of some of it, and this is one of the virtues of being a commanding officer, is that you really have the ability to kind of set the terms of the conversation in day in and day out inside the lifelines of the ship. And certainly the rest of your leadership team plays a key role in that, your chief petty officers, your department heads and others. But a lot of it is just tying everything back, and the way you talk about things, the way you conceive of things, the way you make decisions, especially visibly make decisions, to what is the fundamental purpose. At the end of the day, what is this ship built to do, and what are we possibly in the next few years going to be called to go out and do? So I give some examples in the article of, you're talking to the guy or the gal who's doing the really unpleasant maintenance on the trash pulper. There is a discussion there because, again, if everything we're doing it has some tie to the mission, how can we remind folks of that and keep it in their sort of self-conception, their self-identity of what we do? And this is imperfect. It's it is a very grinding task, especially, as we've seen last few years, life for ships in deep maintenance is very difficult, and just keeping that industrial environment safe and prosperous is hard, much less trying to make people remember that they're warfighters. But even there, as one of my colleagues pointed out, I think we'll mention his name later. Most of our sailors will experience combat in the form of damage control. And the damage control that you have to be ready to execute in the shipyard, as we saw with Bonhomme Richard or USS Miami or other things that happened in that context, the sailors fighting a fire on Bonhomme Richard, their experience is probably not much different from the sailors fighting the main space fire on USS Stark or in other places. So there are some connections, just given the nature of our business, that you can make between the things we're training to do and preparing to, the kinds of eventualities we're ready for just on a given day at sea or even in the shipyard. Those have connections to what warfighting would be like. And obviously some other very different things. And of course, every commanding officer, I think, loves the opportunities to get the wardroom or the tactical watchstanders or some other audience together and talk tactics, go off to do some simulator training and all that. And of course, that's always indicated. But unfortunately, we don't have time to do that as much as we'd like a lot of times.
Yeah, and to your point about damage control, I'm reminded of some of the the management tasks associated with that, right? It's making sure that all your sailors are signed up to go to firefighting school, and that they go to firefighting school, and that you document that they've all been to firefighting school. Those are the management parts of that warfighting task that you can't divorce yourself from, right? It's the two do go hand in hand. That's a good point. So there's a lot of discussion in the Navy these days, and you mentioned it in your article about managing risk, and you advise turning that on its head a bit. And your quote in the article is, "Stop thinking about managing risk and instead impose risk on the adversary." So I love that phrase. It could be a good bumper sticker for the Naval Institute, or maybe we'll put it on the back of our next T-shirt. But discuss that for a minute.
Well, I should say, there's maybe a light dose of hyperbole in there, because of course we can't stop thinking about other kinds of risk. I mean, one of the things, let me back up and say, one of the things I really learned in working through the PCO course, teaching, really facilitating new COs and thinking about my own experience, is there actually is a wider array of risk management going on in peacetime than I think we really ever elicit when we talk about it. We tend to talk about risk management as up. Let's not bang into another ship or have the helicopter bang into the flight deck or somebody fall off, or those kind of very real dangers that are always present. And of course, that's a key part of what we're doing in peacetime. But there are a lot of other things that CEOs are managing, other kinds of risk, and some of those include, the risk of going off on deployment and doing something that is inadvertently escalatory or embarrassing to the United States, down to the kind of mundane business risks that we're dealing with. Hey, are we counting the bullets and the other things like we're supposed to, all the maintenance? You're responsible for a lot of different things, and every one of those things comes with risk as a CO. So number one thing is that it is a more sophisticated problem than we often talk about. When I say stop thinking about it, I think what I'm referring to there is when we're, to the extent that we are able to free our minds and really think about, as I talk about in the article, where you can get time and circumstance to really visualize what combat's going to be like, and ideally begin to think creatively about it. It does require a bit of a mental exercise and a bit of a kind of stepping outside your daily self to say, okay, wait a minute. I've spent so much time worrying about bad things happening to me. How do I transition my mindset? And this is when we talk about warfighting culture, I think this is a very key part of it, is how do I transition my mindset to inflict risk and ultimately, perhaps, lethal danger or lethal effects onto other people. And that's a mental leap that I think we have to recognize is not easily done in peacetime. You can never do it perfectly. Any of the mental leaps required to really try to get to experience what combat would be like. Very hard to reproduce in peacetime. So how can we find ways to talk about that, think about that, and do the best we can? And one of those is we need to reframe our minds and think about, while maintaining this very complicated thing, I'm also gonna have to go out and do things that are very different than anything I've ever done before. And one of those, that hopefully comes with an ability to think in terms of, okay, how can I make this hard on the other guy by just, preserving myself? I'm not sure if that's a clear answer, but.
Well, I have no, it is, but I have a follow-on question, which is, the workup cycle, right? Where you start with unit level training, and you work your way up to a group sale, then you work your way up to a Com2X and a JTFX, et cetera. Did you feel as a CO that baked into that readiness cycle that the training enabled that mind shift, mindset shift to happen, right? Did you feel like, hey, there were, sort of the building block things that we have to do to get ready for warfighting, and that certain parts of that workup cycle, automatically sort of put you and your exo and your wardroom in that thinking process?
And I think certain parts is the right term, or the right phrasing. It definitely at times, you get to the sort of right hand end of your pre-deployment curriculum with Com2X and some of the more free play things, or occasionally on deployment we'll get to do higher end exercises. And there certainly are moments when you get close to that. I would contend, and this is limited by resources, and probably always will be. We of course could use more of that. More, as I advocate for in the article, I think COs could use more not free time, but more time of their own, under their own recognizance to do that kind of training internally. Because what tends to happen in the training cycle is that you're under such schedule pressure, because there's also, the corollary to the complexity of ships, or I guess the related issue is there's also not enough ships. So you're under this constant pressure to get out the door, to go do the job, whatever the deployment task is. So inevitably, there's never enough time to do it. Most things you get to do them once. If you completely, utterly fail at it, maybe you'll do it a second time. But the way the curriculum's built, you kind of have to spend so much time racing through and knocking out all the basic check boxes to get the basic skill sets built, get a little bit of free play time here and there. And so you do get to exercise that mindset a little bit, but it can never be enough. And it certainly is not enough in just the curriculum training we get. And I would advocate that. And this is where the chain of command needs to take notice, control these things. CEOs need more time to do these things. We need to provide them better tools to measure their own performance, and just maybe reduce some of the missions that we're trying to certify in. Just a couple of what I would call lower end or sort of operations other than war kinds of missions that we could probably do without safely. To maybe take a little risk there and drop some of those. By doing those things, ideally, you give COs and maybe group commanders more space to do the kind of free play training they'll exercise that really get your mind into what combat's going to be like, and the different frame of mind you have to be in to survive and succeed there.
Yeah. Did you encourage your JOs or department heads to read and discuss, anything, specific things from naval history, going back to, specific battles, thinking through Guadalcanal, thinking through, Leyte Gulf, thinking through some of the specific lessons or writings of key leaders who went through those types of situations that, as you point out, war at sea hasn't happened for the U.S. Navy, since the end of World War II. So were you able to, sort of play on any of that historical perspective and bring it forward to your wardroom or to your, chief's mess?
Not as much as I should have. I certainly did at times. We were very, very advantaged with Admiral Halsey as a ship namesake. Obviously, he's a pretty clear example of a lot of those things, and participant in a lot of those things you mentioned. So he gave us a great entree to talk about those things sometimes. I did, and this is no fault of theirs, I don't think, but I did find that it was very hard for many of my JOs or young sailors to really relate to Admiral Halsey and to know much about who he was, and so it took a little. When I was slated to the ship, said, "Oh, this will be great. This will be easy. Everybody knows Admiral Halsey and knows what he did. Your average 22-year-old just hasn't spent a lot of time, reading about those things, as you say, and talking about them." And so I think I wish in command I'd spent more time doing that. I think certainly in the schoolhouses now, and in the service community schoolhouses like SWAS, we're getting a lot of great mileage out of reaching back to, as you say, basically the last time we did this, and it's a very, very fertile ground. The Naval War College. I just finished a great World War II case study and war game in my course at Naval War College. So I did not do as much of that as I should have. It's certainly a great way to do it, and I'm very encouraged by how much not only in training, but we're taking some real, there's some real cultural, organizational, and kind of thought framing lessons I think are going into our planning and writing of tactics and things as we as a group, as an institution, conceptualize how this is going to go. We're mining that a lot, I think, very effectively. And of course, those things are going to be very different. There are concrete historical examples to point to things, as you mentioned, like space and some of the IW elements now that existed that didn't at that time. But no, I wish I spent more time in command doing this, and I hope I think a lot of my the folks who are in command now that were previously my students, I think they're out there doing it, and that's only a good thing.
Yeah, one of the things, I wasn't a surface warfare officer, and I've been retired now from the Navy for 7 years. But in that past less than a decade, the WTI program for surface warfare officers has certainly come online, and you're creating a lot of weapons tactics instructors in specific ASUW, ASW. Air and ballistic missile defense, and in mine warfare, and also amphibious warfare, right? So did you, when you were in command of Halsey, I'm guessing you probably had some of those WTIs, in your department head cadre?
Unfortunately, I didn't get any assigned to me as department heads. However, we did do a lot of training with WTIs. SMIDC and some of the other waterfront training agencies have WTIs and bring them, and it's only goodness. And I think culturally in the community, they themselves have been big force multipliers. They're fantastic trainers, to a man and a woman. I've been impressed by every WTI I've met, and every session training session I've been involved in that they facilitated. And so they're individually big contributors. And I think just the cultural idea of saying, okay, this is something that we need people to specialize in again has been very important for the community. And SMIDC is an institution, with a bunch of people that now that's their job and focus on those things. And we had SWEDGE before, which is a much smaller organization without a flag officer, and they're always there doing it. But the prominence they've been given in our community, and the reign they've been given, the free range they've been given to really drive more critical, more deep thinking, basically a higher bar for tactics has been really important. I mentioned, and I don't tie it to WTIs in the article, but I mentioned the Surface Warfare Combat Training Continuum that SMIDC is leading. And this is a family of initiatives that I would sum up as saying that is going to give us a much better set of tools for a commanding officer, or for say a group or squadron commander, to really measure where we're at in terms of proficiency, because we don't have a lot of great tools for that right now in very many areas. There's a few great exceptions to that, but this will really give us a tool set where we can really talk about, okay, here's where we're at, here's where we want to be, here's what we need to do. Now there's because there's so many missions at hand, there's going to always be a little bit of a trading game and a little bit of a risk. We're going to accept risk over here to focus on this because this is either what we're doing or what we expect to do. There'll always be some of that, I think, but allows us to really understand where we're at and where we need to go. And I think, as I alluded to in the article, build a culture around that that proficiency matters. This is. It isn't about, and this is I think a legitimate gripe that you see in the interviews the Senate report did, and the interviews that the MPS student did, that people feel like that there isn't value placed on that. And I do think that's a major deficit. And I think the things that SMIDC's doing, the presence of the WTIs in the force, and some of the tools they're bringing online for us will really enable us to say, hey, Ensign so-and-so is really good in anti-submarine warfare. Let's capitalize on that, or let's be like Ensign so-and-so. Or hey, today, this team did really great at this task. I want everybody else to learn from them. I want everybody else to be like them. Or can we compete? Can we compete across ships and with more fidelity? Those are only good things culturally once we can sink our teeth into them.
Yeah, just a quick acronym explainer for the non-SWOs out there. SMIDC is the Surface and Mine Warfare Development Command. It's in San Diego. It is led by a one-star. And that it is the place where they're creating the weapons and tactics instructors and building those the modern new advanced cutting edge tactics for the surface Navy. So and modeled very much on what was done by it used to be Strike U, and now it's Nautic out at Fallon, Nevada, with Naval Aviation, the Strike Fighter Weapons Tactics Instructor Program, the Swifties, and Top Gun, right? So analogous to that, and a very competitive Absolutely. Program. And I've heard, anecdotally at least, that the promotion rates for WTIs is actually well above fleet average. That those who are selected and become WTIs in the surface community are doing very well in terms of promotion to lieutenant commander and commander and selection for command. So that's all goodness. One last question. So at the end of your article, in your bio, you give credit to 3 other specific officers and also to your students and fellow instructors at SWAS for their ideas and the discussion that helped inform and shape your article. Can you describe some of those conversations for us, and what did other senior surface warfare officers think about the topic and ways to balance, management and warfighting?
Sure. And, as I mentioned, one of the great privileges I've had the last 2 years was to be in a room with all these folks who have, some of them quite a bit more experience than I do even, folks who've been in the Navy for a long time and very, a wide variety of different operational backgrounds and things. And every class, so I did probably something like 25 PCO classes. It's a 3-week course, 11 times a year. So I got through every 04 and 05 command in the service force once and twice in a lot of cases. So that array of people just had an array of phenomenally great ideas. And as the facilitator, I'd sort of bring up these problems and talk about my experience with them. And every time I'd get, depending on how many people in the class, 8, 10, 12 different perspectives, different ideas. And so a lot of that, what you see in this article, has just been generally shaped by that. Some specific ones I call out: Leandra Kissinger, who's a student of mine. She's an LCS CO now. We were in the middle of this discussion, and she brought up that phrasing of a culture that values proficiency. And it's, we talked about different aspects of this and angles on this in several different classes, and I thought that really captured it well. That's what we want, is a culture that values proficiency. And so I think, for the COs that are out there and the folks that have recently left command, they have all been trying to find different ways to make this work in practice. So there's a million great practical ideas, a million great phrasings and ideas for kinds of training and all that going on. One of the things that I mentioned in the article that I think we should consider is we should probably have a best practices, the lesson learned system. We have a near miss and near miss report system for sort of, near mishaps that happen. What we don't have is something like that for training. Yeah. I think what I saw in that room is that the folks that are in command right now and have been in command and will be in command soon are thinking through these things, and we have a lot of great practical ideas. Leandra, and hopefully that came through. Leandra Kissinger hit the nail on the head with that idea that, hey, what I want inside my lifelines is a culture that values proficiency, and I thought that phrasing was great and used it. My colleague at SWAS, Captain Andrew Roy, who's the XO at SWAS. He had mentioned the point about sailors experiencing combat in the form of damage control. So another example of something that I kind of culled from conversations. He was actually my predecessor teaching the PCO course also. A commander that I worked for had talked about, he and they, obviously the Royal Navy, very much the same problem set. I've even gotten some feedback on the article from some of my former Royal Navy colleagues when I did an exchange tour there. That resonates with them for many of the same reasons. And my boss there, who was a Falklands War vet, actually, he had this concept he talked about a lot, that, hey, one of the things that's distinct about the Navy is that we're at war with the sea every day. And that's that connection between some of our peacetime, the kinds of readiness, or the readiness for the kinds of events we have to deal with in peacetime, is often very, very similar to combat, or the things we have to be ready for in combat. So we can leverage those into our training and into our the cultural idea that, hey, this is why we're here and this is what we're getting ready to do. And so just all of this is to say that this is the distillation of some really great conversations over the last couple of years, both in the classroom and with some of my colleagues. I think a lot of folks, to answer your question, a lot of senior officers in the community are thinking, granular level, how can we do these things better, out to organizational changes. The service community is really taking this on as an imperative the last several years, and I think we're making some great progress and some great things coming down the line.
All right, well, we are about out of time, but this has been a great discussion, and it brings up some really salient points that have been ongoing, certainly, since 2017, since Fitzgerald and McCain collisions, and then the aftermath of that, and how the surface community, sort of reoriented itself, refocused itself. I think this article is it's salient. It's also very timely, and it's just brings up some terrific points and debunks some of the things, the ideas that tend to fly around that are easy ideas, but then when you dig into them, you're like, that's not going to fly, right? That often happens. So my guest has been Commander DeVere Crooks, U.S. Navy. His article is titled Management Makes Warfighting Possible. It's in the September issue of Proceedings. It starts on pages 38 and 39. DeVere, thanks for the insights and for being on the show today, and congrats on another insightful article.
Thanks very much, Bill. I appreciate it.
All right. So that wraps up another episode of the Proceedings podcast, brought to you by Textron Systems Aerosonde Uncrewed Aircraft System, designed for expeditionary land and sea-based operations Building on the system's 600,000 plus flight hours in the field, the hybrid quad variant offers vertical takeoff and landing capability and brings enhanced mission flexibility while maintaining a small footprint. Learn more at textronsystems.com. And until next week, remember, victory begins at the Naval Institute.